Okay, this is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network. This is the Truth Attack Hour, and we're back now for the second segment of the show. So, the media, I don't know if you've noticed, is trying to portray Joe Biden as a wise and decent man in order to get over the fact that he's so old he's gotten dementia. And I'll admit it's not his age, it's the dementia, it's the senility at the age that is debilitating and makes him incompetent to serve. So in order to get away from that, they're trying to portray him as the decent and wise old man, the elderly gentleman, and this guy is not a wise and decent individual. He's an absolute, as Hillary Clinton put it, deplorable piece of, yeah, that's right. You know what he's a deplorable piece of, don't you? This man is a pathological serial liar who panders to every single crowd he's in front of. Oh, I'm Puerto Rican. Oh, I'm Jewish. Oh, I'm a coal miner. Oh, I grew up in the poor neighborhood. Oh, I grew up in the black church. This man is a serial pathological pandering liar. Absolutely despicable. And he is incompetent to serve in office. And evidence of how despicable he is and how indecent he is this man rejected and refused to acknowledge his own grandchild, his own blood. Refused to acknowledge his own blood for how long? 2 years? 3 years? Now, that is not a wise and decent man. That is a despicable piece of crap who hasn't got the morality to admit his own blood. And look at where he's led his party. It's pretty clear now from the far left youth radical protests all over the country on the college campuses, at Jewish synagogues now, that the Democratic Party has taken a far left turn into the world of Nazi politics. They don't even understand that's what they're doing. That's how indoctrinated and uneducated they are. The youth are out there yelling things like, from the river to the sea. They don't understand that what that means is the complete and total eradication of the Israeli state, together with the removal or eradication of all the Jews from that state. That was Adolf Hitler's plan, and that is what Hamas is about. That is what Palestine is about. That is what the 1 billion Islamics around the 10 million Jews are about. It's absolutely insane the way the media portrays this as the Jews have surrounded the Palestinians. It's exactly the opposite. How it's the Jews in Israel who were waging war on Gaza. No, it's exactly the opposite. Gaza has been under Hamas political control for 20 years. Did they even build a deep water port to bring goods into the country? No, they didn't even do that. They stole every single penny of aid and dollar to build tunnels to wage war on Israel from underground, underneath the schools and the hospitals, so that if Israel strikes the tunnels, they'll have civilian casualties. And the Democrat Party is supporting this Nazi rhetoric from the ground up. Not at the senior level, but the liberal youth is all in on this. Oh, and I see. So if a Christian or a Catholic who's 80 years old tries to block access to an abortion clinic, she gets 2 years in prison. But when a radical left Nazi blocks a Jewish worshiper's access to the synagogue, oh, that's fine. That doesn't even draw an arrest. They probably told the Jew he was causing a problem, so he should go away. This is the Democratic Party and the liberal policies manifesting themselves. This is where socialism takes you to. Despotic tyranny. People don't understand Nazi isn't far right, it's far left. Nazi is an acronym that stands for National Socialism. National Socialism. And they've elevated it to global socialism. So what's going on is really Glotzy more than Nazi. But it's the same policies, isn't it? From the river to the sea. And it's Biden who is obviously the threat to democracy, attacking his political opponent, trying to put him in jail, having the judge censor him, put a gag order on him, violating the border law, flooding America with illegal aliens to change the voting demographic so they'll be counted in the census. And the liberal states that citizens are fleeing won't lose representation because they're replaced by foreigners who glom onto the welfare state being erected at the expense of the citizens. And he's buying votes by passing out money to students. And there's a simple solution to that. Just put student debt back into bankruptcy court eligibility. That's the problem, is there's no way out. So provide a way out for the individual to be relieved of the debt and to have to deal with the consequences of having done so, rather than all of society. And people would start to think about what they borrowed the money for or what they were studying at school. As it turns out, nobody hires gender dysmorphia experts. Biden has become the little dictator, hasn't he? Dictator at the border, violates every single law in America, opens the border and processes them right in, delivers them to the states and turns them over to the blue administration to hand them credit cards, telephones, shelter, housing, food, and take away all of those facilities from the American citizens whose children are being told, oh, you get to study at home because the school's been taken and used for illegal aliens, or the church, or the park, or the whole hotel. Where'd all this money come from? Who put this money in the budget? Where are they stealing the money from? These aren't planned expenditures. This is the government just diverting funds from the citizens to buying votes and altering electoral demographics. It's treason. It's literal treason. It's sedition to undermine the constitutional republic and the rule of law and replace it with the rule of the apparent majority, as propagandized by the mainstream media, which can always create the appearance of a majority opinion on any issue. Every single policy this man puts in place has been a violation of law and replaced with an executive order. He's trying to remake America by executive orders. They're disconnected from reality, 100%. The whole administration, the whole entire cabinet, Janet Yellen disavowing inflation as a problem and food prices are Mayorkas claiming the border's all set. We're processing things just fine. There's no problem here. Buttigieg, he never showed up. Good God. The energy side, oh, we have no plan for energy. We don't know how to bring the price down. Of course not, because you're an idiot. The whole cabinet is idiots. Delusional, in denial, disconnected from reality, living in the parallel universe that their economic catastrophe is wrought. Where you have two entire realities in America now. On Wall Street, everything is going fine. The market's at the top. There's $5 trillion sitting on the side. And every time the market drops 1,000 in an attempt to correct it because it's overvalued, some of that $5 trillion on the sideline sees it as a buying opportunity. And it may be that they've printed so much money that there's a new economic reality on Wall Street, where there's so much money waiting to buy in that the market, certain pieces of it, certain elements of it, aren't going to collapse much. And if they do, they'll be bought right in by the money on the sidelines, pushing it back up again. And now it looks like Trump is going to take the presidency, reverse the energy policy, start to bring inflation down, and that the Federal Reserve Bank will then lower interest rates, which will kick off another run on the stock market and hopefully get low enough to stimulate lending on Wall Street so that maybe, just maybe, under Trump, the nation can miss the depression that Biden economics are creating. And, they'll work as hard as they can to put off any catastrophic collapse, just like they did in 2008, as all shown in the movie The Big Short, where it points out and shows how all the financial institutions in the government banded together for a year and a half to hide the impending subprime mortgage bond market collapse. They hid it for 2 years while the banks unloaded their unfavorable positions and moved to the favorable ones, which they laughed at. In the beginning. So who knows? Of course, on Main Street, you've got an entirely different reality. The inverted yield curve has stopped the banks from lending. They're not going to lend money when they lose money on every dollar they loan because they have to borrow at the short-term rate, which is higher than the long-term rate they lend at. So they lose the difference on every dollar they lend. So they simply stop lending. And that cuts off access to capital to Main Street. But it doesn't stop the debt burden from having to be met every month, as every month more and more payments to service the existing debt cause that money to be retired. As debt money is repaid, it's retired from circulation. That decreases the amount of currency, increases the competition for dollars, and intensifies the rate at which people fail and can't make their payments and go into foreclosure or homelessness. So every month in the inverted yield curve, we have a lesser and smaller pool of currency available for Main Street to use. So Main Street is mired in a very deep recession. The job numbers are all fraudulent and lies. They're revised 30 days later downwards almost inevitably. And now it turns out that all the job numbers they've been touting for the last year aren't full-time jobs, they're part-time jobs. And where they are full-time jobs, they all went to illegal aliens at minimum wage. They didn't go to citizens. Citizens are being laid off from full-time jobs and moved to part-time and two second jobs and third jobs in some cases. The illegal aliens are the ones getting the full-time jobs. Biden economy has helped only the foreigners at the citizens' expense. This is another piece of the evidence of the level of betrayal this man and this party is willing to go to keep power in America. They're betraying the American people. And what's so stunning is that just a little under half of the American people are swallowing all this bovine scatology. They're swallowing it. They don't have their eyes open enough to actually see the reality. I mean, what is wrong with these people? Don't they go to the store? Do they ever go out in the streets of the cities that they live in? How can you possibly support this man's policies? It's like they're consumed by their hatred for Donald Trump without reason. And Joe says he's not interested in playing politics with immigration. Well, then, you lying, philandering, stop registering them to vote if you don't want to play politics with them. Stop registering them to vote. You are the one playing politics with them by registering the vote. You lying, pathological piece of crap. Okay, sounds like we're coming up on the second commercial break. This is Thomas Fried on the Liberty Works Radio Network. This is the Truth Attack Hour. We'll be back in 5 with more. Okay, this is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network. This is the Truth Attack Hour, and let's just go ahead and get right back into it. You know, one of the better things that Trump has come up with that I've heard is, of course, his proposal to not have tax on tips, which, of course, is really just the beginning because the labors of the American people are not constitutionally subject to any taxation. The whole Internal Revenue Service enforcement of the tax against the labor of the American people is unconstitutional and wrongfully done. And starting with removing the tax on tips is a good place to start because tips aren't profit. They aren't profit. There's no contract. There's no agreement. There's no requirement. Tips are strictly a function of American charity. It's a gift from the diner to the waiter or waitress for exceptional service. And no, service doesn't make it taxable under gross income, where compensation for services are taxable. That's compensation for excise taxable services earned by a corporation or a license holder or some other person subject to some impost, duty, or excise. This entire belief and argument that the 16th Amendment created the power for the government to tax labor directly and without limitation, all sources, is insane. That's slavery. That's not what the Supreme Court held. And Congress, of course, reasserted that the 16th Amendment is not the authority just as recently as 2018. It's Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1, impost on foreigners and foreign activity, foreign imports and foreign places, duty on exported goods, and excises on commodities, licenses, and corporations. That's it. Labor isn't subject to an impost, duty, or excise, and the government admits that. That's why they've had to argue for 55, 65 years that it's the 16th Amendment that subjects you to the tax. But Congress just told us in 2018, 16th Amendment isn't involved. It's Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1. And a research of the history, as I've already shown many times, and there's video on it over at the Thomas Freed YouTube channel and on the tax-freedom.com website, Section 61 was not enacted in 1913 with the original tax legislation. It came 5 years later in 1918 under a 75-year-long Canadian tax treaty that expired in 1993, which means Section 61, gross income, has been dead-letter law for 31 years. It's on the books, but it no longer has any legal applicability or enforceability because the tax treaty it was enacted under expired in 1993 when it was replaced with NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, which eliminates taxation between the countries. It's dead-letter law. It was never enacted by Congress with any applicability other than that provided by the original legislation, i.e., under a Canadian tax treaty where it applies to Americans living and working in Canada under the treaty. It never had any other application. So compensation for services doesn't make the gift of a tip taxable. This is all fraud to enslave the American people and to go after every possible source of income. The Constitution gives the federal government no power over charity, no authority to classify gifts as income, and where there is a tax on the gift, it's paid by the donor of the gift, not the recipient. So to tax the recipients of these charitable gifts called tips, that's not income, that's not profit. There's no business involved. There's no contract, there's no requirement. It's solely at the discretion of the diner as to what and if and how much will be left as the gift, as the tip. So they never should have been subjected to tax to begin with. It's evidence of just how crooked the lower courts and the federal judiciary have become and how subverted even the high court has become, as they've said nothing for 65 years about the misapplication of a direct power to tax without limitation under the 16th Amendment that can't possibly exist. because a direct power to tax without limitation would be a new power under the 16th Amendment. And any new power created thereunder can't be enforced with law unless there is an enabling enforcement clause in the amendment creating the new power, authorizing Congress to write law to enforce it. And that doesn't exist. And that's why, if you tell me the source of your alleged authority is the 16th Amendment, as the government has been arguing for 65 years, I, as a student of the Constitution, know it has to be voluntary, because Congress isn't authorized to write any law under the 16th Amendment. And anyone who says they are is a liar, a seditionist, and a pervert, a legal pervert, trying to explain the socialism that has been destroying America for 65 years. Because that's what this really is. It's not a tax system. It's a socialist debt service system of involuntary servitude by, believe it or not, voluntary allowance. The whole thing is criminal fraud of the highest order. So taking the tax off of tips is a great idea, and maybe it would lead to a stronger understanding that labor isn't actually taxed either. And that what you really need is a whole new system of actual taxation that taxes the corporate subjects, not the sovereign citizens. Oh, you say the citizens aren't sovereign? Of course they are. We have a representative government. The government isn't the sovereign, they're the representative. Who do you think they represent? England? The King of England? The Catholic Church? They represent the American people, who are the true sovereign. We gave the federal government a set of limited powers specifically enumerated and barred the states from taking other powers. And between the two, what's not granted to the federal government and what is barred from the states is left to we the people, to decide the law and the jury, to decide what's legal tender in a transaction. We the people are the sovereign power. We are the owners of the nation, the owners of the treasury. The government is our mere representative. And this reversal of the sovereign authority is part of the problem, because that takes you right back to the socialist dictatorship of the king, or the emperor, or the czar, or whatever he calls himself. Khan? It's all perversion of the constitutional system of taxation, where we, the people, and our right to work are not taxable to the federal government. Not on any source or compensation for service. The whole thing is a fraud. And of course, I've got this all written up at taxfreedom.com, the website, and I've got the YouTube videos now over on the Thomas Freed channel to explain all of this in detail. From 1861, when they had the first income tax as a duty on the officers serving in the Civil War to defray the cost of the war, all the way through Donald Trump's tax law changes in 2018, and the consequences that legislation should be having on the IRS and DOJ in court. So you need to get over there and start reading, get informed. You can pick yourself up a copy of all the documents for just $6. And the simple truth about income tax over at irszoom.com. Just click on the store tab. Okay, let's do a little bit more on news here in the last few minutes. Okay, it looks like all of the criminal cases against Donald Trump are going to get stayed and put off until after the election. The case in Georgia with Fani Willis, the whole case has been completely stayed by an appeals court that is reviewing the charges against Fani Willis and her corruption and involvement with her boyfriend and improper hires and pay and use of the funds. So that's all been stayed. It isn't going to happen before trial. The documents case in Washington, D.C., Jack Smith is in trouble with the courts there. That's been stayed. In Florida, they're going to get an immunity ruling today, and I think the court is going to have to give Trump immunity on classified documents. That's kind of well established historically, and Trump was the ex-president. He had it all locked up. It wasn't insecure. An honest review of the whole thing, I think, finds he will have immunity on that. And even if he doesn't, they're not going to get to trial before after the election. And theoretically, everything should become moot at that point because a new DOJ will simply drop the charges and pull it out. And it looks like Jack Smith might not make it as a special counsel. Remember, I told you before that his appointment was illegal because it's supposed to be an independent appointment, and he came out of the Justice Department. So there's a problem there, and the Supreme Court might act on it, even where the D.C. Court of Appeals failed to do so. So the cases are stalled, and they're probably not going to be going to court. And of course, the New York case was such a joke that nobody in the country cares about it, not even the far left liberals in New York City. So, I think, a lot of people are speculating about whether or not Donald Trump will announce his vice presidential candidacy partner here tonight at the debate just to throw Joe Biden off somehow. But I said a couple of years ago, I thought that Trump and DeSantis would have been the strongest team. I think it's pretty clear that's probably not going to happen now. I'm still not sure that wouldn't be the best team to put forward. But if it's not going to be DeSantis, I think he should pick Vivek Ramaswamy. The guy is sharp, he's young, he's intelligent, he's quick, he's got the right attitudes. Nobody can attack him. He cuts them right down. Trump could send him out as vice president to advocate for any issue he wanted to and to take on the opposition and cut them down just as effectively with fact and law as Trump is able to do with rhetoric and humor. So I think Vivek would be a really strong candidate for him, and that would be the best choice. You got a minority guy who comes from a foreign country, who has demonstrated he has a very sharp business acumen, and has already demonstrated on the political stage that he's got the right positions that would support Trump. So I think that would probably be his best choice, and that's what I think he should do. But we'll see. Trump hasn't done what you expect him to do ever. So I guess that maybe we'll find out tonight. Maybe we won't. He likes to dangle things out there and then pull them back just to keep the suspension building for a later event, I believe. So, how do you solve the government problem of spending too much money? Well, I think that what you have to do is get rid of the government agencies that aren't in the Constitution. I think that means you take the Departments of Interior and Commerce, collapse them, get rid of them, and merge them into what? The State Department? Probably. And then you get rid of agriculture, labor, health and human services, HUD, transportation, energy, education, EPA, OSHA. You abolish all those government agencies. Get rid of all those government bureaucracies. The only thing they're doing is compiling statistics. You take the collective budget for all of those government agencies, you collapse it by 10% every year until the budget is balanced, and then you distribute those budget dollars to all 50 states proportionately under the census, and let each state manage each of those political areas as the state legislature sees fit. That's agriculture, labor, health and human services, housing, transportation, energy, education, environmental protection, and occupational safety. These shouldn't be federal functions. They're not in the Constitution. They've all been made up at times of American history when the government thought they had an emergency and needed a new department. So they just made it up. And now these deep state bureaucrats are writing law through regulatory deference, which is another thing the Supreme Court should toss out. Okay, I think I hear the end of the show coming up. This is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network. This is the Truth Attack Hour. We'll be back again next week with more. And